Solar PV Cast by Shift, a podcast exploring solar energy and the role it plays in improving our lives and our planet. Here's your host, Chris Palliser.
Thank you for joining another episode of the Solar PV Cast. My name is Chris. It is brought to you by Shift. For all your solar and energy storage needs, make sure to visit shift.ca. I'm very excited for this episode because we're going international on the Solar PV Cast. We're traveling all the way to Sweden to take a look at what solar is like in Sweden, how it's used, how it fits into the energy mix, and learn more about a company called Alight that is developing, owning, and operating solar sites. And then my understanding is selling the energy back for fixed rates. Anyways, we'll get more into that in just a little bit. Joining the podcast today is Johan Hernström from Alight. And welcome to the podcast, Johan.
Well, thank you so much. It's great speaking to you, and thank you for having me. I've been listening to a number of episodes, and I think you're doing a great job. So again, thanks for taking the time to speak to me today.
Wonderful, and I'm glad we could make this work with our 9-hour time difference.
Yes, that's true. It's 6 o'clock here. It's been dark for 3 hours already.
Yeah, we're at that time of year, aren't we, where the sunlight is not as good as it was, but that doesn't matter in Sweden. You guys are way ahead of Canada in terms per capita of solar installed, over 3 gigawatts, I believe, in Sweden, and that's kind of where Canada is right now. So for starters, a little bit of background about yourself, and let's talk about Alight, the company you're with.
Yes, sure. No, and again, as we talked about before you pressed record, I mean, we share a lot of similarities, Sweden and Canada, both when it comes to hockey, but also in the renewable space and solar. So, yeah, my name is Johan Hernström. I am leading the offsite business at a company called Alight. That essentially means, and I'll go into the details as to what we do, but that means I am responsible for when we find new sites all the way until we make a financial investment decision to construct solar and battery storage. And so we are a Stockholm-based solar and battery-focused company that offers, let's say, solar as a service to businesses. So we're focused on B2B, so not residential solar, and our mission is to sort of kick carbon off the grid. So as you said, we develop, own, finance, own, construct solar assets across Europe. And so we were founded 2013, which according to our founders was probably 5 years too early if you look at the technology advancement at that time and where solar irradiation is in Sweden.
Amazing.
And so essentially we do two things. We do solar, what we call grid connected or offsite, and we do solar behind the meter, where we construct assets sort of adjacent to our customers' consumption and connect these assets behind the meter.
Now, my understanding is you weren't always in solar. When did that transition happen for you, and what got you interested in solar, and why did you jump into solar?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I've not been into solar for my whole career. I am a mechanical engineer by training. I've been working as a management consultant for most of my career in construction, telecom, consumer goods. Most recently I worked at an American firm called Accenture. And so when I joined Alight, we were then called Neo 5 years ago. It was a combination of a few things that made me take the leap, and it was, of course, working for a purpose-driven company. Alight is very purpose-driven. We do this because we believe solar has a role to play in making sure we meet our climate targets. But then it was also the combination of sort of business acumen, a very ambitious team, and technology. So that has sort of been the red thread of my career, sort of commercial applications and technology. And what I found at Alight was a fantastic team and a fantastic product and market fit and a platform for for growth and with our targets and ambitions of building 5 gigawatts by 2030, we can make a really great impact.
By 2030, that's 6 years away now.
Yes.
Yeah, ambitious goals. You mentioned growth. Obviously, solar is growing in Sweden as fast as it is in Canada.
Yes, no, that's true. And I mean, you said 3 or 4 gigawatts in Sweden. It's actually, I think it's closer to 5 gigawatt today, but it's still only 2-3% of the energy mix.
Okay.
And so I think the potential is probably closer to, say, 10-15%. And the more flex we have in terms of battery storage in the energy system, the higher that percentage can be. So I think Canada, you are at a similar rate. You have more renewable, you have a lot of hydro. Hydro helps in balancing the system. So the more flexibility through hydro, battery and others, the higher the penetration of solar can be. So I think we can easily reach, say, 30 gigawatts of solar in Sweden in 10 years.
Incredible. How do you find the perception of solar in Sweden? You know, in Canada, there's a lot of people that still think solar doesn't work here. We're too far north. You know, is that the consensus in Sweden? I know Europe is so far ahead of North America in many ways when it comes to solar. Is that still the perception?
Yeah, it depends on who you speak to. So, I mean, that is often the first question someone asks me when I tell them I work in solar, is that, well, does it really work here up north? Well, where do you get the electricity from during night, etc.? So I mean, those are valid questions. But then if you look at solar from a sort of from the general public eye, it's actually the most popular electricity source in Sweden, and these polls are done on a yearly basis, and solar always scores the highest. It's around 80 or 85%, higher than wind, higher than nuclear, higher than any other energy source in Sweden. And so there is a sentiment in Sweden that solar will play an important role in the future energy system. Now, of course, again, it's only 2% of the current electricity mix, so it is something we will continually need to work on to make sure that sentiment around solar remains positive.
Yeah. Same thing in Canada here. The initial question is, it doesn't work here. It's too cold. It's too cloudy, especially on the West Coast. But it's interesting. At Shift, the company I'm with, we actually install a product called Roofit. I don't know if you're familiar with Roofit, but it's actually out of Estonia.
No,
and
I have not heard of them.
Yeah, building integrated photovoltaic, so a roofing system with solar built in, out of Roofit.
Okay.
And so it kind of goes to show that, you know, it's not every day you hear about a product coming out of Estonia being sold here in Canada. So it's like, wow,
No.
they're way ahead, you know, on this side of things, which is really interesting. You touched on the energy mix. What exactly is the energy mix in Sweden? I know hydro is a big part. You mentioned nuclear.
Yeah, so hydro sits around maybe 35-40%. Nuclear is still 30-35%. Wind is fairly big, it's 15-20%. And then you have like solar and other smaller sources. But so hydro is by far the largest individual contributor, which is great because it provides the type of flexibility and inherent storage that allows for a higher share of intermittent sources. But we can't really improve on the hydro side. There are no more rivers to exploit unless you can, of course, improve the turbines and all that. So, but we will never reach the levels where you are at. I think I read you're around 55-60% in Canada. So, which is still lower than Norway, by the way. They're at like 85%.
Wow, really?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, all the Nordic countries are, at least in my, you know, from what I know, again, on my travel list for sure, as you mentioned, coming to Canada. But they're pretty progressive and mindful of renewable energy. as a
Yes.
whole. I think I read Sweden is something like 60-70% is renewable.
Yeah. No, that's correct.
Yeah, and how do you find when it comes to nuclear? Is that on the way down with these renewables coming up?
It depends on who you ask.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Totally.
if you ask the current government, they are investing heavily in nuclear and believe that it will play an important role in the future energy mix. But then, of course, it won't happen in 1, 2, 3 years. It is rather at a 10, 15 year horizon. But so from a
Yeah.
government perspective, yeah, nuclear is definitely on the uprise in Sweden. But I think the sentiment from our customers and from our peers is that probably wind, both onshore and offshore, combined with solar, combined with flexibility, both in terms of storage, but also utilizing the inherent flexibility um, in the industry. So shifting consumption patterns, and then also vehicle to grid, which I personally
Hmm.
think would be a huge thing. So I think in Sweden, if half of all cars were electric, that would mean a capacity of 60 gigawatts, and I think any given day in Sweden, the max capacity is 20 gigawatts. So the
Right.
potential there is enormous, but it's a shift in how you think about the electricity system. We've gone from a centralized system with a few large energy sources, nuclear, hydro, into this distributed, flexible, intelligent system. And so I'm hoping that the politicians will come around and see that this is actually the future. It can be built out much faster, cheaper, and it's also a more robust system for everyone.
Yeah. Sweden's a deregulated energy market. Is that correct? In terms of everybody has a choice?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
everyone can choose their own electricity provider. Then, of course, you have the grid operator, and there's only one connection, but then you can choose the electricity provider, and we've
Right.
been able to do that since the 90s.
Okay. Yeah. So in Canada, the only real deregulated market is in Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
then the rest, British Columbia, where I'm at, is BC Hydro is kind of it's more regulated across the country. But in Alberta, and I just had a conversation, and you know their way of bringing it to the market like that is giving people a choice, which keeps things fair. Now with Alight,
Uh-huh.
so just to wrap my head around the process with Alight, so you guys build, develop, own, operate these solar sites, and then you sell the energy back to businesses, you mentioned, at a fixed rate.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct. And by the way, Alberta, I was trying to figure out in terms of solar irradiation, how similar is Sweden to Canada? And so I think Edmonton is sort of at the southern tip of Sweden.
Okay.
And
Oh,
so
that's
most of
interesting.
our solar parks that we build, they sit between the southern tip and Stockholm, if that tells you or your listeners anything. But so
Yeah,
it is
that's
similar,
really
but
interesting.
you have maybe 10, 15, 20% higher irradiation on average than we do.
Well, and I love that though, because again, that just drives the point home to people listening in Canada that solar works here. It
Yes,
obviously works in Sweden and Norway, and there, you know, I think something like 85% of the population of Canada lives within 400 kilometers of the border with the US.
oh yeah,
And so Sweden is even more north than that, yet
yes,
still I know Berlin is kind of around that kind of Vancouver, you know,
mm.
around the 49th, 50th parallel. And again, they've been implementing solar for 30 plus years, right?
Yeah. They're like the Silicon Valley of solar in Europe and
Oh,
Germany. So
oh,
they've
interesting.
had government subsidies since I think 2008, very strong feed-in tariffs, and they really drove the demand from the European side and helped build out a lot of what we're seeing today. But then back to your question. So yes, we sell electricity to large corporates, and we do that through something called PPAs. So PPA stands for Power Purchase Agreements. And we built our entire business around power purchase agreement and actually securing revenue for our assets before we make an investment decision. So, as an example, we're currently building a 100 megawatt solar park on an old airport in southern Sweden for H&M, the global fashion retailer,
no way.
Swedish global fashion retailer.
I didn't know that. It's Swedish, is it?
It is, yes.
Oh, there you go.
And so it's a 100 megawatt park. It's by far the largest in Sweden. It's built on an old airport, so there's a nice multi-use of the land. And so the way that works is even before we started construction, but after we secure the land and all the permits and the interconnection, we sat down with H&M and we agreed that they would buy all the electricity that this park would produce for the next 10 years at a fixed rate. And so once they signed that, then we went back and said to the EPCs, the company that would construct the park, let's start construction. And so now we're in the middle of the construction. The park will start producing energy by next summer. And so from that point on and 10 years out, H&M will take ownership of all the electricity that is produced at a fixed rate. So it helps our projects, it helps us build a robust business case and gain access to competitive green capital. And it helps H&M hedge their electricity cost, make savings, claim additionality, which means that their action led to green projects actually being built. And then also it's a great way of showcasing for their employers and for their customers that they're actively working towards mitigating the effects of the climate crisis. So
yeah, they need to
it's a win-win.
Market that in Canada. H&M, we use solar.
Yeah, they recently published their case study online, so you need to check it out. And and this PPA market, it started in the US. So one of our founders, Harald Överholm, he did his PhD at Cambridge, where he looked at the solar PPA market in the US, and he saw how companies like Meta and some of the telecom giants and AB InBev and others, they signed PPAs way back, and he thought that this is something that could work in Europe, and so it's by looking at what worked in the US, he and a few others thought that this is how we should build Alight, and we should look at the underserved markets where there are no government subsidies, because there are no government subsidies in Sweden, and build it around large corporate that have an actual electricity demand, and that is a more, let's say, robust vehicle to build out the energy system rather than rely on government subsidies.
What kind of system, like what's the energy storage component of these systems?
Well, so historically, and we've built around 50 or 55. I don't remember the exact number of these assets in Sweden. Yeah, we've done by far the most of these solar PPAs in the Nordics. So historically, we have not had sort of embedded storage in any of our assets until 2 years ago. And so from today or 2 years ago going forward, I think we will have storage at most of our interconnection points co-located with solar when possible. And we would do that not only to improve the business case, because you can make money out of storage, supporting the grid with ancillary services and flexibility, but also because we can offer a better product to our customers. So if H&M or Swedbank, which is one of the big retail banks in the Nordics that we have a PPA with, by the way, wants to buy something that is different from your typical solar profile that produces energy from, let's say, 8 to 5, we can use storage to reshape that profile and sell them something different and an improved product. So it will be part of our offering going forward, I would say, in most of the projects that we build when possible. It's not always possible, given grid constraints to connect battery. But
yeah. And the production on these facilities is obviously a win-win. Otherwise, it wouldn't be working. But with the climate and the snow, are they bifacial panels? Are they?
Yes, that's a good
Okay.
question. No, they are bifacial panels. And so with the snow, because when you build on ground, oftentimes at least, as compared to a rooftop, you tilt the panels at a higher angle, simply because it gives you a higher yield, and you can, because you don't need to worry about the wind loads as much as you have to do on rooftops. When there is snowfall, it often falls off,
Right.
and oftentimes it is during the days of the years where perhaps the sun does not shine the most. So over a year, snow is not a big concern, let's say it like that.
Yeah.
And it actually helps cleaning the panels as well.
Totally. Yeah. We say the same thing over here. What is the angle, actually? I've been told that panels have to be equal to your latitude, kind of thing. What is the angle that these solar farms kind of in that, for our Canadian listeners, in that Edmonton area and above, what's the angle they're at?
You know what? I am an engineer by training, but I'm not sure exactly what we are building at, and it actually varies depending on how much land we have available. So
Right.
So usually, if we have, let's say, 100 hectares, we would build maybe 60 megawatt DC, but then we can use the tilt and also ground coverage ratio and distance in between the rows to optimize either cost, so low cost, or capacity. So I'm trying to get out of answering the question because it varies. But
that's the answer.
Yeah, it varies.
Anyone who asks a question in solar, the answer is mostly it varies. It depends. There's many factors, because it's true. There is a ton of factors as well. I guess my mind, I had a gentleman from Iqaluit, Nunavut on the podcast, which is northern, North Canada. And he said his panels are almost vertical. Just because he's so far north, right? So I was just curious if what the panels look like there, but I get it.
But I guess we'll see different types of installations. I mean, we've done most of our installations south facing, but more and more we see in Europe these are east west, and even as you say, they can be placed on facades where they are horizontal by definition, so. It's all about like an optimization algorithm, and when the panels are cheap enough, well, then you can use them in more creative ways.
100%. And the costs you guys are seeing, Europe is seeing the costs come down as well as much as we're seeing here in North America.
Yes, I would think so. I don't know the differences in tariffs and so forth, but we've had a big decline in cost, especially on the panel side, since let's say the supply crunch after during the pandemic, and that ship that got stuck in the canal, where I think from was that 2.5 years ago, I think costs have almost halved on the panel side. But then, of course, if you look at the total capex for a solar park installation, you also have the transformers, the inverters, and cables and everything, and still transformers and cables and civil works with inflation, all that has gone up.
Yeah.
So I know on balance, I think we are probably at a similar cost as we were a year ago or 2 years ago.
What happens? We've been talking a lot about recycling solar panels, and where is that in the Nordic countries, Sweden specifically? We're behind again here in North America, but because we're starting to see more and more solar panels come out, people are saying, well, hold on, we need to figure out what the plan is. Where's Sweden at with that, and kind of end of life maybe for some of these great Alight projects? Is there a plan in place for end of life?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually a question I know a lot of our industry peers are also thinking a lot about. So let me just say that. So we think about these assets on a 40-year time horizon. So the first 10 years, the revenues for the first 10 years are backed by this power purchase agreement that I mentioned with H&M or Lear or Swedbank. And then from year 11 until 40, our revenue is selling the electricity on the spot market. So in terms of decommissioning our plants, we don't yet have any plants that are even close to being decommissioned. Totally. But still, we need to think about it, and we need to, when we apply for environmental permit under Swedish regulation, we need to explain how we intend to recycle, and we also need to lock in some capital in something similar to an escrow, or if it's done through a letter of credit or something like that, to show that actually we have put the money aside to take care of the panels once they reach end of life. So, but then technically, exactly how will that be done in 30 years? I don't think anyone knows.
That's the interesting thing about solar. We're all in this great, exciting time where it's booming. But the questions are going to start coming for sure. This is great. I mean, I love hearing that it's a 40-year plan, because that just shows how reliable and maintenance-free these solar farms can be, right?
Yes. No, definitely. And I mean, if you think about maintenance, there are a few different things. There are not that many moving parts, but oftentimes when we build on ground, there is grass. So you need to take care of the vegetation. And in some of these parks, we have sheeps that walk around and that eats the grass and improve biodiversity. So we can do a lot of biodiversity measures at these sites. So not only to have a positive impact on sort of global climate and kicking carbon off the grid, but also local biodiversity measures to improve the local environment.
There's a few. This is going to be a plug for my other podcast episodes, but I've talked about agrivoltaics on some other episodes, and it's a really exciting business, because to your point about the old landing strip, you're repurposing the land. It's not just going to waste. You're using the solar farm. Apparently sheep are happier in a solar farm because the condensation.
We should ask them. I haven't asked them, but I'm sure they are. They get the shade and
the lambs apparently are happier, and they tried goats, but goats ate all the wires.
Okay.
So agrivoltaics is another. The pros outweigh the cons tenfold, and
certainly,
and that's what's really exciting about it. And great to see that Alight is kind of, got this system set up. Obviously, you said you got it from the North America model, but it's working well. Other companies, now I'm curious, any North American companies that, H&M, is there any other ones that you can tell us about, or upcoming projects maybe that Alight's working on?
Yeah. So we're currently building, I think, 5 solar parks and a number of these behind the meter installations in Europe. So we do these ground parks in Sweden and Finland, and then behind the meter rooftops in a number of European countries. And so we're building 5 projects for H&M. We're building another project for Axfood, a food retailer, one of the biggest food retailer, a 65 megawatt park close to Stockholm. We recently acquired an operating plant. So not only do we do sort of greenfield origination, we also acquire projects from some of our peers. And if you look at our behind the meter business, we have assets with the Toyota, Lear, which is an automotive company. We've done a number of sites for them across a number of countries in Europe. And so we like to offer our customers solar sort of wherever they are in Europe, be it on their rooftops or on ground that we Alight own.
That's
so
great.
And we have something like 3 gigawatts of projects in our pipeline.
Wow.
And that means they are anywhere from us having signed a land lease with the landowner up until the point they have an interconnection and an environmental permit and a building permit, and or are almost in construction.
Amazing. Almost makes me frustrated because Canada's second largest landmass in the world, and you guys, I think, have Alight alone has more gigawatts in the pipeline than we as a country have, to my knowledge. Anyways,
maybe we should open a branch in
Hey, let's talk.
Canada. But I mean, what you need is you need the land, of course, and you need solar irradiation, but you seem to have that, and so then you need grid, and you need okay ground conditions, and so I don't know from a grid perspective if it's similar to Sweden, but if we look at the total electricity production in Canada, it's what it was above 500-600 terawatt hours, right? So it's much bigger than Sweden,
right?
So surely there should be solar should be able to have a much larger share of that cake.
For sure. Well, if Alight opens up a Canadian division, I'll take you for a beverage. Maybe you can head the Canadian division.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's
Definitely.
Pretty cool. What I'm just thinking now in terms of brands. My mind went to brands. What's like the big a lot of residential. This is on the residential side. There's a lot of battery options out there, but Tesla Powerwalls are kind of big residential things. Is Tesla Powerwalls Megapacks, are they a thing in Sweden, in Europe, or is there other big brands out there?
To my knowledge, they have not opened up at least not in Sweden. Right. They might have in Norway. I think Norway is the country that has the most Teslas per capita globally.
Oh, really?
But then in terms of brands, when I think about brands and our customers, often our customers are B2C, like H&M. They have end customers that that care about the sort of green commitment from whomever they're buying from. And so most of our customers, they sign a contract because they want to showcase that. So they are often brands. And they are not necessarily the big industrial B2B companies. So they are brands. And then in terms of the equipment we use in our battery installations, we are technology agnostic. And I think and here's probably where residential and large scale differs a bit, that it's not as clear. Branding around battery and those types of products for the large scale, it's not as clear as for the residential side.
What is?
But more and more.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that more and more residential are installing batteries along with their PV plant on their rooftops, because there are revenue to be made from helping with grid stability, mostly, I would say.
I mean, that's a great point, actually. What is residential solar like? I know Alight's focused on businesses.
Yeah.
What is residential solar like in Sweden? Are there a lot of homes, residential homes, getting solar and energy storage?
Yes. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's it is a number of gigawatts, I would say. If it's one or two, I can't say. And here's where there's been government subsidies in Sweden. So there has been, let's say, it's not necessarily a feed-in tariff, but you have been guaranteed a certain euro per kilowatt hour that you produce, regardless of what the spot price is at.
Okay.
And then also some investment support. So if I'm looking at my neighbors, there are a number of my neighbors that have installed solar where I live, and I live fairly high up north in Stockholm.
And they're still using solar. That's great. And is it just solar and feeding the grid, or is it energy storage?
I would say it's anything that is not consumed sort of behind the meter is exported to the grid typically. So the value in utilizing residential battery for sort of load shifting or arbitrage is still relatively, let's say, modest. So
Okay.
it's the business case for exporting that electricity and then using the battery for frequency regulation is much stronger, which is also how we use the batteries in our solar parks. We use them so far mostly for ancillary services, and then all the electricity that is produced is exported to the grid.
Right. Yeah. So that's same as in Canada. It's called net metering or net billing. So that would be the same in Sweden.
It's not net metering. It's you get paid. I think it's 60 öre, which is like 50 euro cent per kilowatt hour for the electricity that you produce. Whereas net metering is they balance it out automatically, I think. Kind
of over the whole year. You build credits in the spring and the summer, and then you use.
No, we don't have that system.
You don't
here. No. So
just paid out. Keep track with the money.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, maybe the effect is similar, but it's not a perfect system because if you always get paid the 60, even though, let's say, prices are very low or negative, and it might actually be better not to produce at that hour, you're still as a residential customer incentivized to produce because you're getting paid,
right,
which is not helping the system necessarily. So I think that system will change also.
Interesting. Yeah, cool. So many questions. I feel like I've taken up a lot of your time already. I know it's coming up to 7 o'clock there, right?
Yes, that's true.
I feel like I could keep going, but I think we'll pause for now and maybe get you on again, or maybe, like I said, if you come over to Canada and launch some operations out here, or even if you just vacation on the west coast of Canada, I would love to meet you and take you for a pint.
Thank you. Same to you, and it's been great talking to you. It's always great to learn from someone that comes with another perspective in this industry that we both love and believe will play an important role in the future energy mix. I mean, it's clear that solar that solar is still underestimated, and that it will play a huge part in the future energy mix. And where even in Sweden and Canada it works, but in some other countries it will completely change the way electricity is produced and distributed and stored and so forth.
Yeah, it's an exciting future regardless. So we got hockey and we got solar.
Yes, and we got the seasonal changes, and we got a lot of hydro.
Yeah, it is really interesting to your point, how similar right off the top, you mentioned how similar, the Nordic countries and Canada are. We have a lot in common, and especially when it comes to energy. So it's wonderful to hear that, we're just two small cogs in the giant energy wheels of both countries, but it's wonderful to see, would be wonderful to see more conversation between both so we can learn.
Yes, definitely.
Johan Hernström from Alight, head of Offsite Solar, Sweden. And thank you so much for joining the Solar PV Cast today.
Thank you so much.
The Solar PV Cast by Shift with Chris Palliser. To begin your solar journey, visit shift.ca.